Welcome, Andy Gunther.
Thank you, Alexis. So, don't you really hate it when you get an advertising slogan stuck in your mind? I mean, particularly if it's a real old one. Kind of makes you feel like you're not in charge of your own brain, right? Well, that's what happened to me when I started thinking about the state of San Francisco Bay. You know, in the 1960s, the U.S. Time Corporation tortured their Timex watches with hammers and paint mixers. They even put one on Mickey Mantle's bat, all the while saying, "It takes a lickin' and it keeps on tickin'." Well, I've had that slogan stuck in my head because it reminds me of San Francisco Bay. We have given the Bay quite a lickin', but it's still ticking. We poured raw sewage, garbage, massive amounts of dirt into it, removed its natural water filter, smothered its nursery areas, diverted its fresh waters, poured exotic species into the ecosystem. And yet today, the Bay is still producing food, daily absorbing enormous quantities of our wastewater, providing recreation, acting as one of the world's great harbors, and all the while retaining the iconic beauty that has become our global brand. The Bay has taken a licking, and it's kept on ticking, but it doesn't tick the way it used to or the way it could. The history of human activity has taken a great toll on the Bay, on its living resources, its shorelines, and its waters. But more recent decades, and guided by state and federal law, a lot of our activities have been aimed at restoring the ecosystem services that define the Bay Area, and the people of the Bay Area recognize the importance of this. In a recent poll, 92% of the voters agreed with this statement. So these folks and their leaders deserve a comprehensible assessment of whether we're doing enough of the right things to protect San Francisco Bay, and that's what we seek to provide with the State of the Bay report. Now, you know, sometimes scientists and comprehensible don't necessarily go together, right? You know, when you ask a scientist, you know, comprehensible does not mean the 5-year moving average of PCB concentrations in fish tissue normalized to lipid content is within one standard error of the no effects threshold. No, comprehensible means, how's the Bay doing? Is the estuary healthy? And these are not just the musings of an interested public. These are actually the goals of our laws, okay? Also, all of you are probably aware of the goal of the Clean Water Act, you know? That you know what integrity is, right, Alexis? I mean, how do we do that? How do we decide if the chemical integrity of the water is being maintained? How do we decide if the estuary is healthy? In the end, this is a subjective assessment. It can be informed by science, and I think it should be informed by science. But we don't have a healthometer we can plug into the Bay and read the health of the Bay off the dial. Instead, we combine science, public policy, and management goals, and we identify the attributes of a healthy Bay. We identify indicators of those attributes we can measure, and then we identify quantitative benchmarks that we use to evaluate the measurement of the indicators. That's what we tried to do in the State of the Bay report. Our methods are very transparent. Anyone who wants to can get into our 300-page technical appendix if you're willing to roll up your sleeves. We used publicly available data, and we expect critique and review. We hope for critique and review that will lead to future refinements. We're going to have to tweak some of these indicators. We're going to probably add new ones. I think an indicator about carbon sequestration is going to get pretty important pretty soon. Now, luckily, we didn't start on this report from scratch. We had a lot of expert guidance, including from EPA's Science Advisory Board. This committee was chaired by our own Terry Young, who's now on the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And we also had a great pilot effort from the Bay Institute, the Ecological Scorecard. And we are also building on an incredibly rich record of monitoring and research in the Bay Area that started a long time ago. These guys at USGS started a research program in the 1960s and created an extraordinary long-term data set by maintaining their program over decades. I mean, and that is a real challenge. The older I get, the more I realize what a challenge it is. They've adapted their methods as computers and other automated sampling equipment replace older methods of sampling the bay. No replacement has yet been found, however, for the willing graduate student. I was told, though I have no way of verifying this, that that is a young, upside-down Larry Schemmel. And these scientists have also passed their passion and dedication on to a new generation of scientists. And it's their work that allows us to look at trends and understand what's happening. And it's not just at USGS, it's at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, at the Department of Fish and Game, at the US EPA. We are indebted to all of these people's work. So when we look at the ecosystem, we identified 5 key attributes of a healthy bay. A healthy bay has a diverse and well-distributed array of habitats that supports the valued ecosystem components. This mosaic of habitats includes water of varying depth and salinity, wetlands, mudflats, and streams. Water is also a key attribute of a healthy estuary, water that meets chemical quality for contact recreation like swimming, and water that supports fish that are safe to eat, water that is not toxic to biota. And a healthy estuary also has water flows of adequate timing and quantity to allow ecological processes like the mixing of fresh and salt water that define estuarine habitat to occur, and the varied processes that have a part in sustaining a vibrant and productive food web, replenishing and distributing sediment, and recycling waste products. A healthy estuary also has a robust and resilient living resources, including populations of species groups like invertebrates, the San Francisco Bay shrimp, fish like the sturgeon, birds like the song sparrow, and mammals like the harbor seal. And finally, humans are also part of this ecosystem and are taking individual and communal action to sustain the valued attributes of ecosystems so that scenes like this become scenes like this. So with these attributes, then, we needed to identify indicators that we could measure. And there are many possible indicators. We utilized a set of criteria that the National Academy of Sciences recommended in their study, the Ecological Indicators for the Nation. We identified 57 different indicators separated amongst the attributes. So with the indicators identified, then the final step was comparing indicators to benchmarks. And this is really vital because it's by comparing the indicators to benchmarks that we provide an accounting of how the bay is doing. Now, there are 2 kinds of benchmarks that we use. The first is a well-adopted goal. For example, when we have the water quality objective that's produced by the San Francisco Bay Water Quality Control Board, or an objective that came out of another publicly vetted process, like 100,000 acres of wetlands to be restored from the Bayland Habitat Goals process. But where we didn't have such things, we used our own professional judgment to identify reference conditions to use to make this evaluation. Now, we are not suggesting that our best professional judgment immediately be adopted here for everybody to use, but we hope that by doing this, we'll demonstrate the value of having these benchmarks and that we will encourage dialogue so that we deliver to the community publicly vetted goals where we currently don't have them. Now, these attributes fit together into a conceptual model. No such talk like this would be adequate without one. I tried not to connect too many arrows and too many boxes. We need to add humans here, of course, both as stewards of the ecosystem, but also as sources of stress. And the ecosystem produces the ecosystem services that I'm sure none of you can see because it's blocked by the podium. Or to use the term of the Porter-Cologne Act, the beneficial uses. Now, it can be challenging for us scientists to take the ecological complexity of the estuary and reduce it to a simple conceptual model and a set of indicators. And I do hope that the scientists in the room here today will consider the proposition that now more than ever, our public discourse needs your participation. In case you haven't noticed, there are now people in power who want to substitute belief for physical evidence when making decisions, and who are rejecting science as a way of knowing truth. And so I encourage you, jump into that boundary between science and policy. There you will find me and my co-authors, by the way. You won't be alone. Sometimes we do have to oversimplify our research in order to support thoughtful decisions that will protect and restore our ecosystems, both regionally and globally. So I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Josh Collins, and then Tina Swanson will come up, and then I will come back up to finish the presentation.